So tonight, lesson 2 of Christians in a Secular Age. Again, I think several of us who are in the men's class have noticed some interesting parallels between this book and one that comes later. So I think this was our prequel book is my guess. But as we go into lesson 2, I just kind of want to go through an overview, but we'll take some tangents on this road. Again, I assume we have that lesson under our belt, and I want to ask some questions above and beyond the lessons. But just kind of rehashing just a moment. Again, we start the lesson with those examples that we see in the world that show us some signs of a shifting worldview. It goes through some of the historical background and humanism and its rise and how that has affected not only the worldview but also the religious studies. We see Darwinism coming in and all the impacts of Darwinism and evolution and really just the origins question altogether. And then the meat of the lesson is about this section of secularism versus Christianity on all these different topic areas. But as we start tonight, I want to start with you. How would you describe what a worldview is? We talk a lot about worldview in this lesson. How would you describe what that is and what that means? Because we're going to talk about that tonight. So let's make sure we're clear on what it is. What is a worldview?
The way you view the world.
Okay, it's the way you view the world through rose-colored glasses or whatever that might be. What defines your worldview? If I think about what that is, describe your worldview. Bob?
Our own personal morals and values and standards. In this case, we talk about the Christian's view and the world's view. So we would use the standard of the Bible.
All right.
To use as a guideline for our personal views.
All right, so we might describe one perspective of my worldview is the Bible is instrumental to my worldview. We'll talk about the kinds of things that affects. How would you describe your worldview? Would it be the Bible? Where would you start that conversation with somebody? Kyle?
I think with worldview, you're considering why the world is the way that it is. Why is it here? Why am I here? All of those really big existential questions come into play. Whether or not you believe God had created the world, or it happened by accident, or something else created, that kind of is the basis of it.
All right, and so we look at God as the basis of our worldview. I mean, I guess as I think about this, and we're having these conversations with people, it helps me to recognize what are my assumptions walking into this conversation, and what assumptions do they have walking into this conversation. So one of them is, I believe that there is a God. I believe that He revealed His Word to us in the Bible. What are those other assumptions that we've maybe just carried around without explicitly stating that impact how we talk to others? Go ahead, Todd. Okay.
Well, first of all, we have hope. I think that has got to be the center of our focus is, we have faith, of course, but we have hope, that God's in control and we have a hope of the afterlife.
All right.
No matter what happens in this world, that's going to pot.
Yeah. So
we have a hope that the next world will be better.
All right.
I think the prevailing worldview is not hopeful.
All right. So two big assumptions of that. One, not only is there a God, not only has He revealed Himself in the Bible, but Todd believes in his worldview that God has some control over what we're seeing happen around us as well. That there's something there that He's interacting with us. And he believes that there's an afterlife. That might affect the conversations you have with others. Katie, how about yours?
That there's a sort of moral code.
All right, that there is a moral code. Would the world agree that there is a moral code?
Some do, some don't.
Yeah.
It depends on what your truth is.
Okay, your truth. So where is your truth in your worldview? How does truth impact your worldview?
It's movable.
All right, so is truth something that is subjective and definable and malleable through the ages? My worldview has that there is only one truth, and it never shifts and it never changes. There is only one. And again, I just want to state these things out loud because so often, especially if you grew up around Christians, we didn't grow up in the church. We grew up around the church, and then we became the church, hopefully. But if you grew up around Christians, you carry some assumptions that may be very distinct from those that you're talking to. And as I look at this lesson, and really many lessons in this book, there's really two key things that I'm looking at. One, what do I need to do to protect myself in this world and my family and those around me, the things that I'm accountable for? And two, this is a world that I'm trying to influence and trying to teach. And so how does this affect the way that I teach them? Anything else? Go ahead, Juanita.
People like me have a limited world, that we have to take that truth no matter what the circumstance is. They have to know this is the truth and where it came from.
All right.
And like I said, my world is limited, but if you live that Christian life, people know what your world is.
Yeah. And I would have to bluntly say part of my worldview is very much the same. It's very naive. I'll have to say I believe God and the things that God said, thus I accept the things that He stated as conclusions. This is how the world began. I didn't start from the scientific perspective and do all this research and come to this conclusion, oh, there must be a God, and I've discovered how the universe was created, and I discovered where man came from, and now I've concluded there's a God. That's not how it works. We had faith in a God because of all the evidence for that. And because we believe that, and we believe it's His revealed word, then I accept His conclusions about how man came to be and how this universe came to be. Again, all of these things, one word that we just kept using in this lesson, but think about all the things that changes for you. Now, we've described our worldview and we've hinted at the world's. How would you describe in this day and age, practically speaking, America's worldview? Very many times I think there's this doom and gloom painted worldview that there's this extreme and there's that extreme. Where do you think America is in that? Maybe on some of these same topics. Saw some heads shaking during morals. Does America believe that there is morality?
Yes and no.
Yeah, there's some appeal to what's moral and immoral. They look at Hitler and would say that's immoral. Can't really define why, but it's immoral. Bob?
Well, I think one of the big things we see in the prevailing worldview is humanism.
All right.
Belief in self as opposed to a greater God, greater entity.
Yeah.
A reliance on self as opposed to, as we already said, we hope for that eternal home in heaven, kind of thing as Todd talked about.
All right. So what else goes with that? So one of the big pieces is we are self-reliant in America, and self is how we have to view everything else. It all goes through the funnel of me. That's part of that prevailing worldview. What else? How else would you describe that it is as distinct from what we just discussed?
I would say the prevailing worldview is pretty societally based, so morals as opposed to coming from one being, the morals are a group of standards basically that the community has agreed upon and therefore are the rules of society.
Yeah. There's something there we have mutually agreed, and society defines morals. I mean, I think that's a prevailing view that society can shift, and we used to think homosexuality was wrong, and we were wrong because that was a different time. We can shift that morals. Now that's no longer immoral. We were immoral, but it's not. Todd?
We can take that even a step beyond, morals and rules and stuff like that, is a respect for authority.
All right.
I mean, if there is no authority, there's chaos. Whether it's in the world, whether it's spiritually, it's in the Bible, and things like that.
Yeah,
So
good point.
many people, back to kind of like humanism, they have no respect for authority. I'm going to do what I want to do, take it or leave it.
Yeah.
What feels good, and that's why the world is becoming so chaotic.
So when does the world respect authority? What's the world's worldview on that?
When it's convenient.
When it's convenient? What was the other piece?
When it agrees.
When they agree? Kyle?
When it's powerful enough to force you to do it.
When it's enforced? You have another option? Gene?
I would think that the worldview is very frustrating. I mean, the only thing I can do is, see if I can feel it,
Yeah.
I think the world, what do they have really to hang on to?
Mm-hmm.
Very frustrating. we talked about being frustrated, with what's going on
Right.
in the world. But I say it's nothing to what really, and which means you're gonna have more suicides and everything like that.
Yeah.
Because people's got to be frustrated if they don't believe in God and whatnot.
Yeah. What's the point?
Yeah.
I mean, really, what is the point? I think part of that worldview is we are here. Is there a God in the prevailing worldview in America?
No.
If he is, what is he? So, again, I struggle in the same boat. On one hand, I say, nope, but then I'm also in the society where there's a lot of people who believe it, but it's not the God I believe in. It's one who wound up the nature clock and set it there and then walked away, having no interaction, like Todd mentioned, in our lives. And if there is a God at all, maybe it was aliens that put us here because evolution seems to be breaking down, right? I mean, it's just the worldview doesn't know the answers to origins, but they have decided God's not it, right? We don't know the answer. We realize that there's a whole lot of holes there, and science hasn't proven it yet. And so we just know it's not God because that's an unnatural. That's outside, supernatural. We don't believe in the supernatural. All these pieces are affecting our view. Go ahead.
I feel like I've heard more maybe in the last handful of years, a lot of people who like to say things like I may not believe in God specifically, but I'm spiritual, or
Right.
I believe in something, but it's just not well defined.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like a lot of people still view themselves as some level of spiritual or religious in some way,
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
even if it's an undefined.
Yeah, I still have this part of who I am. Go ahead, and then Ryan.
Kind of like piggybacking off of that also is that it feels like a lot of churches now too are pulling what they want like from the Bible but also twisting it to fit theirs. Like there's a lot of churches now that we're Christians, we love God, but we also believe that God believes in homosexuality
Right.
or other things like that. So they're twisting and pulling the parts that they see that fit that narrative into all of that.
Yeah, instead of God making man in his image, man has made God in their image. We want God to look like us, and we think this is okay, thus he must think it's okay. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was thinking about when Chelsea said how it's people, they just want to be spiritual. They don't, if you have definition, then you have to have standards. If I have a standard, then I have to live by something.
Yeah.
And that's what's so hard is I want to do it my way. Just like when I want to worship, the church of your choice, worship the way that you want to. All of those things play into our selfishness. It's not God's view, it's our view.
Yeah. What must be right to him is what feels good to me. I mean, really, it must be right because it's resonating with me. That makes it right. Go ahead, David.
And I mean, the lack of a central standard that everything goes out from, as Gene said, is extremely frustrating, even if for a time it feels good when it agrees with you. Because if standards only exist based on the general consensus of the people with which you interact around you, well, the people change, people's ideas change, their thoughts change, and so there aren't actually any standards or boundaries. And I mean, we are not children, but we're very similar to them, and that's one of the key things you learn when dealing with child development is if you don't set boundaries.
Yeah.
It's not that they won't know what a boundary is and they'll do the wrong thing. It's no, they will feel unsafe.
Yeah.
Boundaries make children feel safe.
Yeah.
It's the same way with us. We're just better at dealing with it if it's not there.
Yeah.
Because we've developed coping mechanisms.
Such a good point.
But so if we don't have that central laurel from somewhere that is universal and immutable, there is no safety in anything throughout the entire world and anything we do or interact with.
And we see that from the very beginning in Genesis. And I'll go on a brief tangent. When I remember the father moment for me was when I realized the flailing child who's just born wants nothing more to be wrapped in the little blanket cocoon so that it does feel safe and secure. And so in the world's view, freedom is giving in to all your desires. That's free until they own you. And then that's not free, and where Gene was talking about suicide and what's the point of life. God's rules are what are free for us. He has defined our boundaries. Let me just say I appreciate this conversation because I wanted to pick apart this a little bit because there's so many things I feel like I assume as I talk to people that get really frustrating when I'm talking to somebody new. Because I realize one of these core values, core assumptions are dramatically different for us. And if I look at the world, there is no God. The closest God the world has is science, and even science doesn't have truth. It has facts that we reinterpret and re-envision and come to new conclusions, but it's never a solid conclusion because it can change if we learn more. There is no truth. We're just constantly learning. So I guess as you look at your worldview, there are a number of social issues that hit social media, that hit the news, that hit you on the internet, and a lot of social issues that hit me, I already have an answer from my worldview. It's not because I studied it, it's not because I dug into it, it's simply because I already have a worldview that includes God and afterlife, the control of the world. What are those social issues right now that everybody else is concerned about that we already know an answer because of our worldview? Give me a few. Bob?
Homosexuality.
Homosexuality we brought up. Go ahead, Gene.
I hadn't thought about this before, since I got into this subject, but I feel like that a Christian's life is more disciplined.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In other words, not that doesn't bother me or whatnot.
Right.
But it's more disciplined.
Yeah. God has called us to be self-controlled.
You've got the Bible and what it's saying, and whereas the worldview just do whatever you want to do.
Absolutely. Kyle?
And parallel, maybe the thing that contains what Bob said is sexuality in general.
Yes.
Marriage and everything revolving around the family is just, it's up for grabs.
Yeah. When's the right time to express your love physically with somebody else? My worldview has already defined that for me. What is your gender, by the way? My worldview has already defined that for me. Right? You think about these things that truly other American homes are struggling with, that our worldview has defined it for us because we've already reached that conclusion. Other social issues I think about, abortion and euthanasia. When should life end and begin? God has defined that for us, and He spelled it out very clearly. That's not mine to choose. What about how we treat power in this world? Let's say you're put in a very strong position of authority. How do you act in that role? Do you do what's best for you and take a little on the side? What's wrong with that? Everybody does that. That's moral. No, God says, here's what that looks like. So again, when I think about all the things that the world is struggling with and we describe it, there are social issues that He has already defined for us. And what that looks like. So getting to the book now, question 1 says, list some of the changes in American life. And I think what we're looking for is, what's the evidence that you would see in day-to-day life that shows you that worldview and our society around us is changing?
Before we do
Please.
that, it just occurred to me, one of the important differences for us that use the Bible and God is our boundaries don't change.
Right.
And those that don't, it's so fluid. It's incredible. And you talk about the number of genders, and it just so happened, I was on YouTube earlier, and I happened to catch this short, and they were interviewing these young ladies on campus. They asked them how many genders there were, and they were infinitesimal.
Yeah.
Unlimited. And can you list them? And they might list 3 or 4, but they're unlimited. And you kind of go, how? It's like Gene says, that's chaos.
Yeah.
You have no standards to go by. It's just totally fluid.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right. Go ahead, Todd.
Along that line, we've heard for the last several years, follow the science, and stuff like that. There's an X chromosome and a Y chromosome.
Right.
When you come up with a Z chromosome, you might have an argument.
Yeah.
It's just, it ain't there.
Yeah, and true science describes what God did. You're not fishing around the edges. Go ahead, Kyle.
I think about this is sort of a gruesome topic, but mass murders. It used to be just mass murders and we caught the guy who did it. Now it's murder-suicide. Almost all of them.
Right.
There's no belief in an afterlife, so who cares?
Yeah.
Right? And it's gory, but that's a change we've seen.
That's a great example. And you just look at the value of life as one of those things, whether it be abortion or euthanasia or mass murders or suicide. I mean, just what is the value of life at this point? And again, you see that evidence of a shifting worldview. What else shows you that things are changing? You mentioned earlier, your truth. I mean, that whole phrase shows it. Johnny?
So normally when you think that you're like greeting yourself to someone, you'd say, hey, how are you? What's your name? Now people are adding in like, what's your pronoun?
Yeah.
Things like that, and they're like, those are shifting as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess that's depending on who you're talking to, but that's like a piece of evidence that's changing.
Yeah, you'd see that, especially if you're on a campus at this point, or you're in some businesses. It's getting rather uncomfortable that I've got to learn everything about the way you prefer me to talk to you, and I've got to guess things unless you tell me. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Just some things with school, and I guess like kind of been thrown back into it in an interesting way since our kids have been home for a while and Adele's back at school this year. But I've just been kind of like taken aback by some things. You know, like we get emails about, oh, this is our list of books that we can choose from for this English assignment, and like,
wow,
no, none of these are okay.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna read any of these books. And like, this might seem silly, but like I go pick Adele up from practice and stuff, and like the entire track team is shirtless, and
Yeah.
Adele was like, "That's normal," and I'm like, "No, it's not." It wasn't for me. That's new. And
Yeah.
it's apparently normal and accepted, and just like so, little things that seem little probably to a lot of people, but like have really caught me off guard this year.
Yeah. I think one of the earliest things, and you talk about the shirts being off, I mean, it's not just sexuality, but the very absence of shame altogether, and that there shouldn't be shame. It doesn't matter what your perversion is, we should all be okay with that. Like, we shouldn't shame someone for going down this crazy back-ended rabbit trail. There is no shame. And again, it reminds me, as soon as I was thinking about this idea of, whether it be young pregnancies or perversions or pornography, Jeremiah 6:15, were they ashamed because of the abominations they've done? They weren't even ashamed at all. They didn't even know how to blush. Therefore, they shall fall among those who fall, and at that time I punish them. They shall be cast down. That very absence of shame is a descriptor of this worldview changing. Kyle, go ahead.
You can see that too in our entertainment. We are entertained more by spectacle and how far can we push an envelope versus telling a good story or having a character that's interesting. Now it's just, well, who can take off the most clothes or kill the most people? That's what entertains us now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that gets to the heart of that next question. What evidences do you see in how the Bible narrative is presented, or what's in school books about origins, or how we handle morals? The funeral question was a very interesting one to me. Go ahead, Gene.
You know, Bob mentioned a while ago about the Bible, that we have the Bible, and that's true in that, because what I'm thinking about is the denominational world at this time is having a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
Marry who you want to, and all these social problems, they're having a lot of them. And we don't have that, because as Bob says, we've got instructions how we live our lives.
Yeah.
And we know what to do.
Yeah, it's been defined.
Yeah.
So I want to shift to that middle ground now. So we've talked about kind of these extremes here. Julian, you go ahead and then I'll come back to it.
Well, and I haven't heard half of what's been said behind me.
That's all right.
The thing that keeps going through my mind when you talk about this, you talk about the world, you talk about humanism, relying on yourself, and the story that we've had in Revelation.
Yeah.
We know there is a God. We know He's in control, and we know how this is going to turn out.
Right.
And there's a lot of comfort in that. We may not know what's going to happen in this country tomorrow, which we don't.
Yeah.
But when you look at everything that's going on, you're talking about how many pronouns. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and then you look at the people that are in this country that, you know, death to Americans. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But in all of it, we have a peace because we know how this is going to come out.
Mm-hmm.
All we have to do is listen to our God, trust in His Word, be faithful to it, and we're going to be with the King in victory in Revelation 19.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And part of what I want to make sure we get to it before we end is this point right here, which is all the craziness around you. God's in control. You know, the point that Todd made earlier. God is in control. And there's no reason for me to be just upended by all of this. We were told it was going to happen. And we know God's in control because He's already painted that picture for us. So I want to come back to this idea of the extremes of a hyper-conservative worldview, as the world would see it, and the no-rules worldview. Let's look at the religious worldview on several of these topics. About God, about the Bible, about truth. And the trouble that the denominations find themselves in today as we see, you know, shifting changes. What do they believe about the Bible? What do they believe about God and the Holy Spirit and the revelation to man? How would you describe that?
It kind of drifted into the worldview.
Yeah. So what is it? I mean, they still believe there's a God. We're not in the world.
I mean, sometimes it's the Bible was written to a different people and it's no longer relevant to us as society has moved on for 2,000 years. Sometimes it's we interpreted X, Y, and Z wrong because of our societal bias at that time, and we're now more educated and understand what it truly meant.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's maybe parts you can pick and choose parts of the Bible that were accurate,
Right.
Verse weren't. I mean, I'm sure there's others, but those are the ones that
Yeah.
come to mind.
Great examples. Kyle?
One of the biggest ones is that, and this is true in the academic world, this is true in the denominational world, but they denied predictive prophecy for a long time. The fact that they say, well, Isaiah couldn't have told about Cyrus because that's in the future and
Right.
that's impossible, so he must
Thus.
have later.
That's right.
So they interpret the Bible through the lens of there can't be prophecy, right? So they're bringing their assumption to the text and making it fit, and that happens in a lot of categories.
And the only conclusion is the date was wrong, and so it had to be later. Yeah, absolutely. We see the same thing with Revelation and other books as well. So as I look at these, you know, we talk about several of these areas. I want to come back to that if we have some time, but I want to look at how does this impact us? You know, when we look at these differences in the worldview and how it affects Christians here, I'll go ahead and cheat because you already saw it. But one of the ways that it affects us, that there is a stark differential happening between the worldview of America and God's view, is persecution. And this whole idea of how does that impact us? Now, do I expect to be killed, burned at the stake? What are we looking at here? How is persecution going to look in the next, let's just say, 10 years? What should we be expecting based on what it's looking like today? Kyle?
Look what's being said about Jews on college campuses. It's not a step very far to say, well, now Christians are the ones that are holding us back or doing this or doing that. You know, the mob that eats one can eat the next.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. Go ahead, Chelsea.
There seems to be a general idea that like the lack of acceptance of things makes us hateful.
That's right.
And so I feel like that's what I hear or see the most is that the Christians are the ones that are so full of hate.
Yeah. And not the Christians, but those fundamentalists. Those fundamentalists like us are full of hate and intolerant because they won't shift to where this world has gone.
They're the antis.
We are the antis, yeah, the new antis. So again, I feel like persecution's there. And I remind us of these passages. Do not be surprised, brethren, if the world hates you. Why shouldn't we be surprised? He was crucified for what he said, and now you're saying the same thing, and we're shocked that the world's intolerant to us for our lack of tolerance. Don't be surprised. This is coming. Just prepare your brain for it. Ryan and then Gene.
you and I talked about this a while back when we were talking about Nero in that men's class. Our view of persecution is so minuscule compared to what it actually was. Like, I have not seen a person impaled on a pole, lit on fire to light the streets in the evenings, which is what Nero would do to Christians. Like, so we become so soft to the idea that I don't want to say anything to my neighbor because I don't want him to think I'm weird.
Right.
Or, you know, I don't want him to be like, man, if I'm praying in front of everybody, I don't want it to offend other people or whatever it is. You know, like, who cares? When did we care so much about? I'm not saying that other people don't matter. I'm saying that
Right.
our view of persecution has become so soft. What are we really willing to suffer when you put in perspective that he hung on a cross, gave everything, every ounce, left heaven, the glory that he had. I'm here to walk, to be a sacrifice for us, but I don't even want to talk to my neighbor about how their soul could be saved.
Absolutely.
It's interesting.
And it reminded me of one of the passages I wrote down was Colossians 1:24, which is, now I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake, and in my flesh I am filling up what is lacking in Christ's affliction for the sake of his body, that is the church. Well, what was lacking in Christ's affliction? I mean, wasn't he full of all the suffering that he needed? We fulfill Christ's vision for us when we suffer for his sake. And so by hiding in that corner, not offending, I'm not doing my job. I'm not saying we're to be offensive. That's a whole different bucket here. But to use my opportunities that I have, whether it be up here at work or seeing an opportunity where somebody's struggling and I'm hesitant to say something, number one, I'm not helping them. Number two, I'm not suffering for the sake of Christ when I hide it.
We can't confess him before men. He will not confess us before God.
Absolutely right.
I mean, it's that simple. Literally it is.
Yeah. David?
Well, and I would slightly modify what you said.
Go ahead.
I think we should be offensive. We shouldn't be hateful when we do. We absolutely can offend people.
Gotcha.
That's part of it is on their interpretation or how they take what I said.
Yeah.
Right? And I can't be in control of that.
Yeah.
What I need to be sure I'm doing is I'm doing it with grace and love as I offend them.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. I've got a friend that I work with who I value dearly, and when I go to his house, he's got this, every gender welcome here, every sexual preference welcome here kind of sign. And we've had several discussions. I mean, he's very curious about my fundamentalism. I was like, look, I believe there's a God and there's a standard, and he gave it to us. It's not that I hate anybody. It's that it's sin. That's all it is. It's the same sin that I have. It's just that's their sin, and it's not acceptable either. And so we can say it in a way that may offend, but still, it's just sharing God's truth. I'm not making a judgment that I think that person is any better than me or worse than me. We're in the same sin boat, and we have the same sin problem, and we need the same resolution. So again, one of the things I want us to take away from this lesson, when you see these worldviews diverging to such an extent, prep your brain for what's about to happen. If you haven't already been there, you will be persecuted if you're Christianing right. And if you're not, we may not be Christianing right. Bob?
I think it's fascinating. We live at a time, never in my lifetime did I ever think that I would see college campuses explode like they have. And now they're chanting, let's behead the head of the college and the administration and on and on and on. And ironically, our educational institutions, and I use that term very loosely, have created something they can't control.
Oh, yeah.
And what we see when we talk about persecution, it may not be, as Ryan said, a tacit persecution, but it will be an attempt to shut us up.
Yes.
To quiet us, to take away that lone voice in the wilderness, as David's talked about, where we don't be hateful, but we can be offensive. They're going to try to shut that up, and this is all part of it.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting to watch it roll out.
I don't remember where the statement was made in the New Testament, but it was giving you this sense of martyrs, men who were sold asunder and all that. But it talks about those who refused their release from prison. Like the world was trying to, oh yeah, we did you wrong. I'm sorry, go ahead and get out. No, we're going to stand here, even though you're trying to get me out of this prison. I'm going to stay in this prison until you handle it rightly. And you acknowledge what that was. And so again, let's not be surprised by persecution. To that end of how we approach it, let's glorify God in our behavior. When there is a worldview difference and we are talking to people in the world, when I say may be offensive, but the way that I interact with people, may it glorify God. May He be pleased by what we're doing and not only the stand that we're making, but the care and concern and the compassion that we have for that lost soul, just like we are without him. David?
And circling back just a little bit,
Yeah.
the persecution thing, something I constantly reminding myself is what God said to Elijah when he thought the whole world had
All by myself.
God, when he was by himself, right? That there, I don't remember the number now.
Yeah.
So many still haven't bowed the knee to Baal.
Yeah.
Right? And when we are acting like Christians out there, yes, we will be persecuted, but I'm shocked how many times, I'm praying over dinner at a restaurant or something, and someone next in another table or the server or somebody will comment and be like, oh, I'm so glad to see people still doing this, right?
Yeah.
And it's, even if we probably don't like align on everything, I'm not saying we do, but there is a lot of people out there that do lean and agree, at least in some level, with us.
Yeah.
That we don't have to be terrified of the whole world. We just need to be aware that there will be cost to following God.
Absolutely. As I walk into a business on occasion, and one of the first things I'm looking at the org structure and how we're managing people, I'll ask very point blank, who are your C players? Right? You've got the A players who who work in this company as if they own it and they want every decision to be. You got the B players who do a great job clocking in and clocking out, and they do a great job. C players shouldn't even be here, and we keep hanging on. Who are your C players and why? And if you don't get rid of your C players, you're risking your A and B players. That's the issue here. And if I think about what we're looking at here, two pieces. One, my individual purity, and two, the purity of the church. So when I look at two distinct worldviews, the biggest danger is first selfishly that I'm going to get dragged into that world. Romans 12, 1 and 2. Be not conformed, but be transformed. There is an absolute temptation for me, I don't know about you, but for me, that I want to be accepted by this world. I want to be liked by this world. I want people to enjoy and appreciate all those great. That's not what we're here for. We're here to be transformed by the Word, not conformed to this world. And so there's a real temptation here for me, as the world departs further and further, not to go to their extreme, but just to step out a few steps. That's the real danger. I think we know and are grounded well enough that we're not going to go to the extreme, but where have you stepped out a few steps? Where are you approaching? The other passage that comes to mind with church purity as well, and in this topic, is that idea of the prodigal son. How did the father respond to the prodigal son?
Open arms.
Open arms. So did he chase him down as he walking away with his riotous living? No, but he stayed right there ready for him to return to the truth. Right? And that's what we need to be. We need to stand firm where the truth is and open arms, accepting people who are ready to come back. But we are not stepping into the world. In, not of. And again, we have a real need for us to maintain our individual purity, but also the purity of the church. Again, 2 Timothy 3:1, understand this, that in the last days, and that's where we're at, there will come times of difficulty. People will be lovers of self, lovers of money. They will be proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, lacking self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous and reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. It's crazy how many times I just run over all these words and you get through the verses. But if you truly break down each one of those concepts, that's the examples we see of that worldview shifting. The conclusion, those having the appearance of godliness but denying its power, avoid such people. When we have people in here that act like that, we need to get them back, bring them back to that truth. We've got to maintain our individual purity and the purity as a group. A couple more here. One of the things that I see that is difficult is it seems difficult to evangelize. Now, where do you experience that? How is it harder to evangelize now than maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago? David?
I mean, for me, the big one I see is if there's no objective truth, I've got to start 17 steps back from where I usually would have. If we can at least agree that there is something that is objective truth, it's a lot easier to talk you through stuff from there than it is now, where I have to first convince you that you and I can't actually think truth is different than each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So even having a common definition of truth. What other assumptions did you safely make 30 years ago? We had a common belief that there was a God, that there was some concept of that. Thomas?
Probably that the female usually that you're talking to is actually a female.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of a joke, but we're at the point now that, like, you know, some people are going as far as like surgery. I mean, they're physically changing their body. It's not just, you know, maybe we were at, and I mean, we're obviously younger than, you know, some of you guys, but like, it used to be, I did. We're breaching a pretty tough subject, you know, but it was in the closet. It was, I think this. I talk about this in secret.
Yeah.
And now I talk about this in public. Now I dress this way.
Mm-hmm.
Look this way. Now I am physically getting surgery to change, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's getting, you know, like I said, we're getting further and further from how do we handle these things.
Yeah, the assumptions get harder. Todd and then Kyle.
The scarier than that is these children that are getting puberty blockers and stuff like that, and the parents are, you know, being held in neglect because they're not allowing their children to have puberty blockers and be called, you know, the opposite sex and stuff like that. You know, the parents are losing control.
Yeah.
You know, and society is dictating what parents can and cannot do.
Yeah.
And contrary to popular belief, it doesn't take a village.
Yeah.
Back, what, Hillary Clinton, I think, said that.
Yeah.
We can't rely on the village anymore.
Yeah.
You know, once upon a time, I mean, I can rely on this village.
Right.
But, you know, the village as a whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
Go ahead, Kyle. I had some commentary that I'll leave off there. Unkind.
I think the difference between Philip talking to the Ethiopian eunuch, who believed in God, was a Jew, had the book of Isaiah open in front of him.
Right.
Versus Paul in Athens. These people, they're not even sure if they've got all the gods labeled, so they got one statue to the God they don't even know about.
Yeah.
Right? And we're closer to where Paul was than Philip.
And I feel like they're in a better spot. I mean, at least they had gods, you know, that there is something beyond our power. Now, Mark has made this point, and let me come back to you, Gene, in just a second. It's also easier now to evangelize than ever, is one of the points that I think Mark has reiterated over and over. As the world gets darker, the light shines brighter. And that whole idea, you know, how can the gospel appeal to a prevailing American worldview? The world is looking for identity. They are dying for identity, quite literally, because they belong to nothing, they mean nothing, they are nothing. And what God can give you is someone made in His image. And we can bring that to someone who is struggling with identity and what do I mean and where is my end? The world is dying for community. You think about LGBTQIA plus minus, I don't even know where it's all going to go because everybody wants a group to be part of. What did God give us? A group of peers who will hold each other accountable to a common standard and set of rules. There is no more comfortable community than that. And that's what they're looking for. The world is looking for freedom. And they have taken Satan's lie of freedom so far that they are feeling the burden. The surgeries, once the surgeries are over and you feel like I'm done, you're still empty inside because it didn't fill that hole. And so we have what the world needs. And again, I appreciate you guys going down some of these tangents with me to truly define the assumptions that we live this world with and to evaluate the assumptions that others are, because this is our end goal, is to convert that lost world. And if we can give them what they need, we have hope. Gene, let me give you the last word tonight.
The church is going to have to be very, very careful because of what's going on in the denominational world. It's going to be coming in congregations.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to be doing some teaching on subjects or whatnot so that if the church has a problem, then you have some evidence or something that that church does not stand for that.
Yeah, yeah.
There's no way that they're going to miss it. Congregations don't have problems.
That's right. And to maintain the purity of the church, we are teaching heavily on topics that split other groups 10, 15 years ago. That's where our efforts need to be today, because now we're finally thinking about it. So appreciate that point. Thank you guys for all of your input tonight.